Brothers and sisters, yesterday the psalm in the Mass really captured my heart. And it says basically, from heaven the Lord looks down upon the earth. And it reminded me of a foundation or kernel of the spirituality of Saint Therese of Lisieux. Saint Therese herself described very much her spirituality around devotion to the holy face of Jesus. But she also had this profound sense of not just the face of Christ, but that Christ gazes upon her from that face. And this idea of living in the gaze of God, for us to just be aware and conscious of that the God is looking upon us right now. He sees me, he knows me, he hears me. And just to pause and let that really sink into us, because sometimes I think we know these things, but we might be so caught up in the busyness of our own interior life and our mind and the world that, just to really slow down and just be aware that God is very much aware of me right now. And the beginning of prayer, as we have said so many times, is just to become attentive of that, to be aware that God sees me, that he knows me, that he's listening to me, and that I can live my life under his gaze. And we know that, as the psalm says, the Lord looks from heaven, his gaze is upon the earth, upon the land. So the Lord looks upon us, knows our life, is involved in our life, in all the details. He's guiding us. If we've asked him as a father to guide us towards salvation, that's something he has promised that he will do. That's a prayer that he will answer, because he's faithful to himself. He's faithful to his justice, which is to be just, to be faithful to the covenant he's made with us. And so if we say, Father, guide me, he does that. That doesn't mean he won't have obstacles or trials along our way, but he guides us. So to live in that presence of God, to really experience or try to cultivate in your heart that awareness of his gaze upon your life. And of course, above all, from the Eucharistic Lord, where the Lord looks upon us with a very special look from his Eucharistic heart, from his Eucharistic face in the Eucharist, where his eyes are truly there. It's present. His whole self is present. And he looks upon us with such tenderness and kindness and love. And also he looks at us with those eyes that call us to greater, call us to more love, to more sacrifice, to more conforming of our life to his life. And so just to speak about the importance of a gaze, I think already in our own life, when we know somebody looks upon us with a particular interest of love and kindness, it has a way of, to borrow the words of St. John of the Cross, clothing us in beauty. When you smile at someone and you show them love, they can light up. And so you're clothing them in beauty. They become beautiful by triggering in them their own love and that kind of expansion of heart that is one of freedom. And so that in our own relationships, that depending how somebody looks at us, they could look at us with disdain, they could look at us with disgust, they could look at us with shame, they could look at us with envy, and all the million ways emotions come out in the eyes and the body language. And they could be oppressive and debilitating. But the look of God is always one of encouragement and love. God is love, and God doesn't know how to do anything else but love, because that's his nature. And he's the eternal love that pours forth, and so part of prayer is aligning ourselves through faith to recapture that gaze, to enter that gaze of the Father upon our life and upon our heart. And as I mentioned early on, this gaze, the capacity or the potential of any gaze to clothe someone with beauty. So let's speak of this little poem from the Spiritual Canticle of St. John of the Cross. And he says, so how God clothes his creatures in beauty, especially by merely his glance. And so he says, scattering 1,000 graces, he passed through these groves in haste, and looking upon them as he went, left them by his glance alone, clothed with beauty. And that's wonderful. I really like that. Left them by his glance alone, and clothed them with beauty. Saint Therese of Lisieux herself wrote about, her whole idea of, she said, for a long time we've been looking at each other, her and Jesus. This is her preparation for her first Holy Communion. We've been looking at each other, but now in Holy Communion, that glance that she experienced from Christ gave way into communion, into union, into profound unity. And she says, that day, referring to her communion day, it was no longer simply a look, it was a fusion. They were no longer two. Therese had vanished as a drop of water is lost in the immensity of the ocean. It's not amazing? And again, we have another quote by Saint Therese that, my God's glance, his ravishing smile, that is heaven for me. So she had this profound sense of God the Father smiling upon her life, and entering that gaze swells her heart and gave her joy and gave her strength. So let us enter upon the gaze of the Lord.